Sandringham Central Dental Care. Dr. Akbar and Dr. Frank will provide you with the best dental care in Auckland at very affordable prices. Sandringham Central Dental Care, 532 Sandringham Road, Sandringham. Phone 09 815 7205.
No matter how you relate to your car, it is important to care for it in specific ways that will maintain its reliability, preserve its drivability, and protect its retail value. Moon Motors and Tyre Centre, 81 Huia Street, Otahu, Auckland. Phone 09 270 3434.
Hello Rohan, how are you?
Good, thank you.
At the very outset, could you outline the purpose of your New Zealand visit? As part of our campaign, one of the things that we have been speaking about with workers in the United States is how working people in the United States and around the world have been bearing the brunt of an economic crisis that is worldwide, in which the bosses are looking for ways, as part of their solution to this economic crisis, to shift the burden of that crisis onto our backs. We're finding that everywhere in the United States and worldwide, working people are feeling the consequences of this crisis, the increase on prices of food, increases on the cost of living, the decrease on wages, on real wages, how the bosses have been speeding up the levels of production everywhere, growing unemployment. For example, yesterday I learned on the number of jobs that were cut on the meatpacking industry here in New Zealand. At least 300 were announced yesterday by this company, a mussel processing company. And both the conditions, the conditions that working people are facing here in New Zealand are very similar to the ones faced by workers in the United States. And it has, and our campaign as part of our campaign, we've been reaching out to workers internationally. Our proposals and our program presented during the campaign is one that is aimed at unifying working people internationally, because we have the same challenges, we have the same enemy, the capitalist bosses, and we need to look for ways on how to forge links between workers here in New Zealand and workers in the United States. So our visit is part of that today. Immigration is closely related to what you're talking about. I mean, how do you see the immigration issue in the United States, especially in the immediate past? We had huge demonstrations for demanding, demanding amnesty to more than 12 million undocumented immigrants. I mean, what sort of politics are associated with it?
The capitalist bosses in the United States have brought millions and millions of workers, immigrant workers from all over the world, into the United States, and to be used as a super exploited labor. They've used immigration to drive down the wages. They've used immigration to impose conditions of super exploitation in many industries in the United States, as part of their drive to maximize the greatest amount of profits from working people in the United States. As they do that, and the immigration has been such, the size of it has been such that has changed, it has transformed the labor structure of the United States. And today you find millions and millions of immigrant workers who are part of the working class and who are part of the labor movement today. The intentions of the bosses, however, was to bring these immigrant workers and maintain them separated, isolated, intimidated, so that they can be super exploited. But instead what you're seeing is the opposite. You're seeing immigrant workers participating in struggles to organize unions, and struggles against the raids and deportations. And the best example of these struggles on how immigrant workers are
participating in working class struggles in the United States have been the massive mobilizations on May Day that began in 2006 and have taken place again in 2007 and 2008. The fight for legalization is one, I think today, that is not just a question for immigrant workers, but what's involved is the unity of the working class, because if the bosses get away with maintaining a section of the population divided or treated as a second-class status, it gives them a stronger hand, it gives the bosses a stronger hand to do the same thing with the rest of the working class. And this is why, I think that the fight for legalization is one that the labor movement as a whole need to take up and champion and fight for it.
Can you name some of the institutions or individuals or organizations that have been involved in the traffic of the immigrant wave that you were talking about, that they have been deliberately brought into the country? That means this is totally different to what you see wave of immigrants heading to United States for a better life.
Well, today you find companies and different industries in the United States that do contract out directly. Thousands and millions of workers, for example, in the agricultural business, are brought as guest worker programs in the United States. That it's very widespread. That type of visa is very widespread in the agricultural industry. In the meatpacking industry, you find some companies that actively go out and recruit workers to come and work in the industry. And the combination of that and the conditions that the imperialist powers, the United States and other imperialist powers, impose in countries in Latin America and Asia and Africa are driving millions of workers from the land into major cities in their own country, and from these cities in their own country to every major industrialized center around the world. So it's a combination of both actively seeking to bring these immigrant workers and the conditions that are being created in the semi-colonial world, what is driving millions of workers into the United States and everywhere.
So the standoff between Venezuela and Colombia, Venezuela accusing U.S. of meddling into its affairs, and Hugo Chavez feels that it is threatening his country with invasion. How do you see this scenario?
Well, I oppose any the military presence of intervention of the United States in the political or military affairs of any country, and the steps, the moves that the United States government have been making in the last years through Plan Colombia, through the existence of a military base in Ecuador, which the Ecuadorian government recently moved to in defense of its sovereignty, moved to request the departure, the removal of this base from Ecuador. The presence of the military presence of the United States, like I mentioned, in Colombia and other parts of Latin America, are aimed in anticipation of the big social mobilizations that we have been seeing, social explosions that we have been seeing throughout Latin America by working people there and peasants there, in response to the consequences, the effects of decades of capitalist plundering of the resources of these countries, and that have been provoking resistance to the consequences of these methods have been provoking the privatization of the country's patrimonies. I mean, with the austerity reforms that have been imposed, all of these things are provoking a response by working people there, and the military presence there of the United States is with that in mind. So I believe that that they should be removed. The troops and should be removed, and the aid, the military aid, the massive military aid that is being given today to the Colombian government should be interrupted, should be suspended immediately.
How do you see it, the contest between Barack Obama and Republicans John McCain?
Well, I think that the most important thing to point to this election is the impact that the economic crisis is having on the perception of millions and millions of working people around, in the United States, who are very concerned about what the economic crisis is bringing. The uncertainty of the future, especially as you see millions of people on the verge of or having lost their homes due to the so-called mortgage crisis, the inability of them to keep up payments, the tens of thousands of jobs that are cut every month. The Labor Department, for example, just announced last month, in the month of April, something like 40,000 manufacturing jobs were lost, and 60,000 jobs in construction were lost. At the same time that the prices of food, fuel, insurance, medical care continues to go up, wages continue to go down. There is a growing concern by working people there, the continuation of the war in Iraq, and many people are hoping that the current presidential candidates will offer some proposal that will bring about some relief to this situation. But if you listen very carefully and you get beyond the demagogy that the candidates use, that they use to try to present themselves as being concerned about the plight of working people, being understanding of the plight of working people. Once you get beyond that and you start looking at that concrete proposals, starting from the fact that all three of them support and defend the interests of the big capitalist families in the United States, you will find that whoever wins the elections in November, working people, if it's a capitalist candidate, a Democrat or Republican, whichever one of them wins the election, working people will continue to be pushed against the wall, and we are going to continue to be forced to organize ourselves and mobilize ourselves to defend our rights and to fight for better working and living conditions. And this is what our campaign offers, a vehicle.
That's what I was driving at. What sort of alternative the U.S. citizens have? Well,
we are presenting the Socialist Workers Party candidates, myself and Allison Kennedy, the candidate for Vice President of the United States, have been presenting a working class alternative, a fighting alternative, on how working people can organize around demands that can help confront the consequences of the economic crisis. But ultimately, what we're proposing is the need to take political power, for working people to take political power, put in place a government of workers and farmers that can be used to organize society in a more rational way, in the interest of the majority. To do that, our main proposal that we have been making to get to that is the need to form our own political party, a labor party that is based on the fighting militant union movement, labor movement, and we're beginning to see struggles that are pointing in that direction, on how the struggles, like for example, like the big mobilizations that are going on by immigrant workers, the struggle by owner operators, I think is what you refer to here, by independent truckers in the United States. The struggles by dock workers and to protest the war, which on May Day, dock workers in the West Coast carry out an 8-hour work stoppage to protest the war in Iraq. These struggles are pointing in the direction of the transformation of the labor movement, and the need to begin to act independently of the Democrats and the Republicans, forge your own party to fight in the political arena, and like I said before, ultimately take political power and establish a government of our own.
How well the U.S. public is informed or well aware of your party?
Well, the electoral system in the United States is designed to create the illusion that the only two parties that are participating are the Democrats and the Republicans. We have been using our campaign to reach out as broad as possible to working people in struggle, and we have taken our campaign, to the mobilizations for immigrant rights. We have walked the picket line, with other trade unionists organizing unions. We have participated in protests against police brutality, spoken in many different university campuses across the United States, letting working people know, letting workers and youth know that there is a choice, that they don't have to settle for the lesser evil, but that they have the opportunity to vote for a genuine working class alternative.
So what about the mobilization, using media as a vehicle to propagate a word about your policies, about the alternative to the citizens of the country?
Well, we have been using and looking for the opportunities to get as much media coverage as possible, but you have to remind yourself, we have to keep reminding ourselves that the media today is controlled by the same capitalist owners that own everything. I mean, you have to have millions and millions of dollars to be able to have access to a small slot on TV today. I mean, you have seen the obscene amounts of money that the candidates, like the Democrats and the Republicans, are spending today in their campaign, which a working class party, a working class candidate cannot, spend, and do not want, the millions of dollars that they receive from the capitalist bosses, because is the only way that we can guarantee that we can maintain an independent campaign and that we don't have to answer to the owners of Ford, to the owners of, of the big banks in the United States, the railroads, the mines, but the way how we do it is, again, through the different struggles, find the way, the space, to present our platform on the media.
That is what my next question I was driving at. What factors influence a candidate's successful run for the presidency?
Well, we think our campaign has been very successful. Has been very successful because it has given the opportunity to an increasing number of workers to break politically from the Democrats and the Republicans, which is an essential step to be able to wage effective battles, whether it's for union organizing or against police brutality or for legalization of undocumented immigrants. As long as we continue to be tied to the parties of the bosses, the Democrats and the Republicans, our struggles will not be able to succeed. So our campaign has been successful in that regards, and has been successful in presenting a working class voice in the elections. My candidacy, the candidacy of Allison Kennedy, I think have been very effective in presenting, in being able to present that platform, present our proposals, but also in utilizing our campaign to extend support for many workers in struggle today. Now, that's not how the other candidates measure success. There's success in large part is measured on the degree that they can create.
First of all, the money is involved.
Well, in the degree in which they can create a big show, making people believe in the United States that they're actually deciding on something, but in reality, the course in which the ruling class is carrying on its major policies, whether it's the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, or the attacks on the social wage, or the attacks on our working and living conditions, that will continue regardless of whether there's a Democrat or Republican in the government, in the White House.
No, what ails the U.S. foreign policy? I mean, like we have seen its intervention in so many countries across the world, and the present war, Iraq and Afghanistan, and the use of depleted uranium on civilians, millions of people getting displaced, over 5 million alone in Iraq itself, I mean, like, what exactly has gone wrong with U.S. foreign policy?
Well, I think that the current foreign policy is actually in continuity, so with many of the with the imperialist course that they have maintained for the last decades. But I think I do agree with how the current economic crisis that we're living through is driving the imperialist powers, just like it's driving the bosses and the capitalist bosses in the United States to intensify their attacks against our living and working conditions, is driving the imperialist power to compete between themselves with their rivals abroad for greater control of resources, greater control of markets, in anticipation of big social explosions around the world. They themselves speak about how the war in Iraq and Afghanistan are part of a long war that will last for decades. And what they're talking about is how as the economic crisis, they will be driven more and more to use military power abroad to defend their interests. They will not always use military power. Often they will put an immense amount of pressure on other countries to force them to line up or to follow their dictate. They'll use different forms, but it will be driven by the same forces, by the same dynamics of the economic crisis. You're seeing, for example, today the comments by the presidential candidates, John McCain, Senator Obama, and Hillary Clinton, are paving the way for the continuation of that course. They're competing to see who's going to be the best commander-in-chief, and demonstrating to ruling circles, to the capitalist ruling class in the United States, that they will be their best representative in defending their interests abroad and at home.
I mean, in view of what we were talking about, the influence of the factors affecting the run-up to the US presidency, I mean, what do you think of the AIPAC report talking about the Israeli lobby in the United States? Now, that lobby, it is alleged, is increasingly pushing the US policy towards having a war with Iran. I mean, how do you read it from a perspective, from the background perspective of the NPT, wherein Iran is supposed to be a signatory to non-proliferation treaty, where it has the right to enrich uranium on its soil, but then the world fails to talk about the alleged weapons status of Israel. How do you see this disparity?
Well, one thing that we need to be clear on is that Washington's policy towards the Middle East is decided in Washington. It's not decided in Tel Aviv. It's decided in Washington, and they make those decisions on the basis of their economic and strategic economic and political interest in the region. And you have seen how they have brought into play many different forces to carry that out, and including, collaborating with many different governments in the region, beyond just the Israeli government. You've seen how I think how Washington has done that to advance their interest in the region. Washington is leading the way today, the way of in collaboration with other imperialist powers, to block other countries from developing energy resources, including nuclear energy, and it's one way on how imperialism is blocking development in the semi-colonial world. It's being done under the banner of non-proliferation, and I believe it's hypocritical what they do, claiming that they're guarding the world or protecting the world from nuclear arms, from nuclear weapons, when Washington itself is the one who today has the largest amount of nuclear weapons, and is the only government that has in history has used weapons against humanity, and are the ones that the initiators of all the wars that we have seen. I mean, they coined the term preemptive wars, but every war that we have seen, Second World War, Vietnam War, all of these wars have been initiated by Washington. So in reality, the imperialist powers are the greatest, the biggest aggressors, and the ones that pose the greatest danger for humanity today.
How do you see sanctions? In the name of sanctions, a lot of atrocities are committed. Millions of people get killed, especially the children, with regards to the sensitive medicines and etc., especially in the Middle East and other Latin American countries. How do you see sanctions? Do they have the same effect as war does, or is it much more than that?
They're criminal. I mean, the sanctions that are being carried out today disproportionately have an effect on working people in these countries, and they're used by Washington to bring often the governments in these countries to like I said, to align to their dictates, but also have been used against working people and governments who have stood up against U.S. imperialism, like we have seen in the I think for nearly 50 years now, an economic blockade that has been carried out against the people of Cuba, in the Cuban Revolution, and the consequences that has had on the Cuban people, because of the fact that the Cuban people refuses to give up their course of building a socialist revolution in that country. Refuses to roll back the gains that they have made when they took political power in 1959 out of the hands of the capitalists and the landlords in that country, and began to put the resources of that country to work for the benefit of the majority. Something that Washington will never forgive the Cuban people for doing that, for having made that revolution. I give you that it's just one example of the criminal way on how these sanctions are used, and how working people in the United States and everywhere have nothing to gain from supporting any of these sanctions.
How has the so-called war on terror affected the daily lives of the U.S. citizens?
Well, you're seeing, as part of the so-called war on terror that Washington is carrying out today at home and abroad, you have seen an attempt by Washington, and in some cases have made some gains in eroding political and democratic rights of working people. And they've been doing it, trying to convince us that we need to make some sacrifices in order to live safe, like in the United States, or safe of any military threat. Now, I think that is becoming more and more. It's becoming clearer, I think, for an increasing number of working people in the United States, how many of these measures that are being put in place today, supposedly to fight against terrorism, ultimately will be used against working people as we go in struggle, as we go on strike, as we try to exercise our rights to protest, and so forth. For example, this has been used before and will be used again against dock workers at the port. That's where the government before has ordered these workers not to go out on strike, because this supposedly will pose a threat to national security. It likewise is being used with other workers as they have gone out on strike. The greater use of, for example, of methods like secret evidence, indefinite detention. All of these things are eroding, the constitutional protections, the basic protections that working people have, and in closing down the political space that working people have to organize to defend themselves. That's I think ultimately what the ultimate target is of their so-called war on terror.
Mm-hmm. A lot of countries have followed suit with the United States in promulgation of terrorism suppression laws, and where the Latin American countries have rejected them, here in New Zealand our government has adopted terrorism suppression law. Maoris are the indigenous population of this country, but very recently, last year mid-October, Maoris have been branded as terrorists, allegedly in view of the October terror raids. Now, how much do you think will be the effect of this over here on the indigenous population when compared with the populations elsewhere in the name of war on terror? People are subjected to a lot of inconvenience and atrocities.
Well, I had a chance to meet some of those who today are the government is try to victimize through the so-called war on terror, and the description on how that was used against the entire community. It's a good example on how this anti-terror laws will be used against oppressed nationalities who are fighting for their sovereignty, for their self-determination. But also, I think in the case of Maoris here in New Zealand, given their place within the working class in New Zealand, will ultimately be used, and its aim at intimidating participation in union struggles and others. You see, I think not quite a similar use, but or not in exactly the same situation, but in the United States, for example, many of these laws have been used against fighters for the independence of Puerto Rico. The United States still maintains as a colony the island nation of Puerto Rico, and against other oppressed nationalities there, in the United States.
Hans Scholar, he is the UN observer. He was here in New Zealand about a couple of months back, and he spoke about 9/11. What do you have to say about 9/11? Credible engineers and architects have come out in the open challenging the government's version of events on that day. Was it an inside job?
Well, I think the most important thing about 9/11 that is often not discussed enough is how Washington used 9/11 as an excuse to accelerate its attacks against our democratic and political rights in the United States and in carrying out its wars abroad. That a course that they had already been on before 9/11. These attacks that we saw accelerate after 9/11 did not start with the Bush administration. The previous administration, the Clinton administration, had laid down the groundwork, for example, for the formation of Homeland Security. It had already laid down the groundwork for the enactment of the U.S. Patriot Act. The basis for that, for the extension of these laws, for example, you can find them in the 1996 Anti-Terror and Effective Death Penalty Act that was passed in 1996 under the Clinton administration. and the immigration law that was passed on that same year that laid down the grounds, for the use of mandatory detention, secret evidence, increase of espionage, domestic espionage. Those things you can find already prior to the Bush administration. 9/11 gave them an excuse. Give them an excuse that they use to try to accelerate those attacks. But it's an example on how the capitalist governments that have always used this kind of a terror attacks as an excuse to intensify their attacks against their democratic and political rights. It's not the first time that they have done this before and using that as an excuse to do that. I've heard plenty of evidence also, on how the buildings came down as a result of the flames and the explosions that coming out after the airplanes. But I think that that's not the most important thing, because the most important thing is how are we going to organize to confront the offensive by Washington and the imperialist powers against our rights at home and abroad.
How optimistic are you about your Socialist Party making it to Washington, Capitol Hill?
Well, I'm very optimistic about the struggles that you'll see sprouting around the country. I think that you will continue to see. We're beginning to see an increasing number of working people who are acting consciously, organizing in a very conscious way to defend themselves, to link up with others, to extend solidarity, and that's, I believe, is going to be the road forward. In advancing the proposals that we are making, and it's the way on how we will measure at the end of the campaign, how we will measure the success of the campaign. Did we advance? On increasing the confidence, the unity of working people, the confidence to act independently of the bosses and the bosses' parties. That in itself is already a victory in our campaign.
What is the official membership of your party as of today?
I couldn't tell you. No, I don't know the exact. I don't know the exact number. It's very broad. It's like we have active branches in many cities around the country. And supporters of the campaign are also much broader than just the membership of the party.
Okay, thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you.
Immigrants, I mean, what sort of politics are associated with it?
The capitalist bosses in the United States have brought millions and millions of workers, immigrant workers from all over the world, into the United States, and to be used as a super exploited labor. They've used immigration to drive down the wages. They've used immigration to impose conditions of super exploitation in many industries in the United States as part of their drive to maximize the greatest amount of profits from working people in the United States. As they do that, and the immigration has been such, the size of it has been such that has changed, it has transformed the labor structure of the United States. And today you find millions and millions of immigrant workers who are part of the working class and who are part of the labor movement today. The intentions of the bosses, however, in the United States and around the world have been bearing the brunt of an economic crisis that is worldwide, in which the bosses are looking for ways, as part of their solution to this economic crisis, to shift the burden of that crisis onto our backs. We're finding that everywhere in the United States and worldwide, working people are feeling the consequences of this crisis, the increase on prices of food, increases on the cost of living, the decrease on wages, on real wages, how the bosses have been speeding up the levels of production everywhere, growing unemployment. For example, yesterday I learned on the number of jobs that were cut on the meatpacking industry here in New Zealand. At least 300 were announced yesterday by this company, a mussel processing company. And both the conditions, the conditions that working people are facing here.
Sandringham Central Dental Care. Dr. Akbar and Dr. Frank will provide you with the best dental care in Auckland at very affordable prices. Sandringham Central Dental Care, 532 Sandringham Road, Sandringham. Phone 09 815 7205.
No matter how you relate to your car, it is important to care for its in specific ways that will maintain its reliability, preserve its drivability, and protect its retail value. Moon Motors and Tyre Centre, 81 Huia Street, Otahu, Auckland. Phone 09 270 3434.
Hello, Rohan. How are you?
Good, thank you.
At the very outset, could you outline the purpose of your New Zealand visit?
If you as part of our campaign, one of the things that we have been speaking about with workers in the United States is how working people was to bring these immigrant workers and maintain them separated, isolated, intimidated so that they can be super exploited. But instead what you're seeing is the opposite. You're seeing immigrant workers participating in struggles to organize unions, in struggles against the raids and deportations. And the best example of these struggles on how immigrant workers are participating in working class struggles in the United States have been the massive mobilizations on May Day that began in 2006 and have taken place again in 2007 and 2008. The fight for legalization is one, I think today, that is not just a question for immigrant workers, but what's involved is the unity of the working class, because if the bosses get away with maintaining a section of the population divided or treated as a second-class status, it gives them a stronger hand, it gives the bosses a stronger hand to do the same thing with the rest of the working New Zealand, are very similar to the ones faced by workers in the United States. And it has, and our campaign as part of our campaign, we've been reaching out to workers internationally. Our proposals and our program presented during the campaign is one that is aimed at unifying working people internationally, because we have the same challenges, we have the same enemy, the capitalist bosses, and we need to look for ways on how to forge links between workers here in New Zealand and workers in the United States. So our visit is part of that today.
Immigration is closely related to what you're talking about. I mean, how do you see the immigration issue in the United States, especially in the immediate past? We had huge demonstrations for demanding demanding amnesty to more than 12 million undocumented